Let's get some parting shots from our guest host. The governor's been here, Mitch Daniels. You got a great new book out.
Well, eye of the beholder. Somebody else will have to decide if it's any good or not.
We'll have to decide. Yeah. We've talked a lot about jobs, and we've talked about the problems of what is going on in Washington. We haven't talked specifically about solutions.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you had a couple of plans out there. If there was a way to stimulate the economy, it would be to do what?
Yeah, let's start by, I think we should start by agreeing it's the sine qua non of everything else. You know, we don't have faster private sector growth. School is out fiscally, and in the area that matters most, which is the preservation of the promise of upward mobility in American life. So I'm with Glenn. It has to start with credible, at least long-term fiscal balance. I'm not one of those who believe that these things are in tension. I actually think that the debt reduction, something meaningful there, is the first step in a jobs plan. I think the second step.
So you think deficit reduction is the first step in a jobs plan?
Yes, I do.
Because there are some people who would say that deficit reduction unto itself, it means you're going to cut public service workers. I mean, this is how you cut the debt, right? I mean, public service workers are going to lose their job.
I've listened very carefully. I just don't buy it. I mean, listen, under any circumstance, the boldest plan we can conceive of, there'll still be an enormous deficits. You won't be lacking for fiscal stimulus. I think the credibility, Glenn Hubbard spoke to it, is step one. I think step two, clearly the tax reform. I'd be optimistic about that. But the sort of things you guys were discussing have broad support across the spectrum, and I think could happen. Third is
now. By the way, I know you're for means testing, but I'm curious on taxes. Is there any circumstance in which you would accept higher taxes?
Let's all agree.
In the context maybe of like a Bowles-Simpson-like plan where spending is coming down? Yeah,
the answer is we're going to need a whole lot more revenue. The only question is how you get it. We're going to need a lot more revenue to have a prayer of making ends meet here. And you'll only get it through rousing economic growth. You know, we could have a separate discussion if we could get to a flatter tax system, something that translates, as Gary said, into more or less consumption-based. We'd have a separate discussion about where those rates are. And, talk to me about something that produces a lot of revenue as long as you don't cross the line and start penalizing growth. That's got to be the touchstone for every key national decision the next few years. Will it add to the growth of the private sector or not? You know, energy, I think, is a huge opportunity. We ought to just resolve every question in favor of paying Americans for the energy we need. The one good break this economy has gotten in the last few years is the shale gas and
where are you on the environmental concerns then?
That they are secondary. You know, I mean, I think they are manageable. If the upside here is too big in terms of the economic growth that we need to strangle this baby in the cradle, as some people seem willing to do. I've had a long look at the evidence, and these problems are very improbable and secondly manageable if they ever happen.
Isn't that the one thing that everybody agrees on is economic growth is what we want. All our problems get solved at the tax level. Everybody, both sides, no matter what, because there's always nuance in what people agree on both sides of the aisle, but everybody agrees with growth. But growth of the private sector.
Right. Not the public sector.
Not growth of government. That's the whole difference. And that's where all the ideological differences, I think, reside, right? Kind of.
No, I'm with you on that. I guess what I'm curious about is in the interim, right? We got to get from here to here. Yeah. And the question is, I appreciate the long-term story. The question is, do we need to do anything in the short term, or do we just wait it out?
I'm for action now. I mean, whether it's possible in this environment, you know, any flickering hope I had for that got even weaker when the president made that speech this week.
Right.
I'll try to. I always look for a way to give a little credit. These regulatory decisions recently, I don't know if I trust them. Right. It may just be a head fake, you know. But the ozone and the CO2, what they said about that, be hugely promising. But it ought to be much broader. We got to have a moratorium on the
Hoover Dam, the GI Act. I get taken in sometimes. You know, you got an eloquent guy like Tom Friedman or something, and public-private partnerships, and you look back at some of the great things that I think that America did them, but there was government involvement in a lot of them. Yeah. And is that possible again today? And how can you do it where you don't let the government just waste the money and do crony capitalism or bridges to nowhere? Is
Joe,
it possible?
listen, I sometimes say I must be a Whig because, you know, I believe in a very limited sphere for government. I talk a lot about it in this book. But infrastructure, not only of the bricks or asphalt and cement kind, but in this age, fiber and frequency as well, I believe is absolutely a core responsibility of government because it's one of those actions that enables the private sector to grow and flourish. Look, in Indiana, we're in the biggest building boom in state history. We did a business deal that you guys would love to have done once in your career. We got 62 times EBITDA, Gary.
Yeah, I was going to say, you monetize infrastructure. Walk us through how you monetize infrastructure, what the decision was, and how that benefits those who live in the state.
Because we believed, along with Joe, that there is an infrastructure huge problem, and we shared in it. Right. And there was no way to get the money together to do it any other fashion, so we leased an existing toll road. We hit an incredible sweet spot, both in terms of the financial markets and the interest of international companies. And this is happening, as you know, all over the world except the United States.
Right.
And, you know, we got a bid that exceeded our wildest expectations. We're reinvesting every penny. Not a penny went to paper over any near-term fiscal issues. We'd solved those already. Every penny's going back into building roads and bridges. We're at 3 times the historic run rate.
How long is the lease for?
75 years.
75 years.
By the way, we got $4 billion of free cash, no borrowing, no interest.
And the investor, it worked for the investor because they had access to capital that they could then essentially make a profit for themselves by running this lease out 75 years.
Well, we don't know if they'll make a profit. They haven't so far, but that's their issue. We de-risked,
what kind of profit have they modeled out?
Well, you know, I think they told their syndicate, all their investors, which, you know, American pension funds and universities and so forth, to expect, you know, a high single-digit return. Okay. Modest but reliable. They haven't got it so far, but again, not our problem.
Right.
We also got a much better toll road than we ever had before because they were obliged to put billions into that.
Right.
You know, 2 things to get back to your question,
Joe.
Well,
because I think Solyndra, I think I keep hearing the government needs to invest. And invest means tax, get the money, and then the government uses it to invest in it. But when you say invest, it's not spending, and it sounds good, and but is it possible?
It's a very elastic term. You know, I think it's an acceptable term when you're talking about a bridge or a road, something that a tangible, long-term, permanent asset like that. You know, just 2 things. One, I think it is a legitimate issue and an important priority for the nation. We'll only get there if we're willing to welcome private capital as well as what we can afford to tax people, you know, at the gas pump and elsewhere. The second thing is, and some governors have said this over and over, and we don't get anywhere. They ought to throw out the federal rule book or suspend a lot of it if they really want anything to ever be shovel-ready, as they love to say.
Right.
You know, and at the start of the first fiscal stimulus bill, some of us governors suggested that. Look, if you really try to make jobs happen, you know, set aside or let us certify that we'll build them right. But we won't violate the environment. That didn't fly.
Of the Republican candidates out there, who do you like right now?
I like several of them. You know, there are several with the character and the skills to be president.
Is the field too large right now? Should the field be narrowed down?
I'm a more the merrier guy about all that stuff. I mean, it will shrink. It may not be complete. Maybe still something.
Who are you waiting for, Christie? Who are you waiting for, Christie?
Well, you know, he's a great guy, but
you could still get in.
I won't, but somebody could. You know, which is
you'd be vice president of us.
Who are you hinting at? Maybe.
No. I'm just making the observation
that something else going on.
You're thinking Cuomo.
Right. Yep.
Let me tell you what I really.
We got to run. I apologize, but this has been absolutely a terrific hour with you, and we're going to have you back on the set.
It's like a ringside seat at WWF. I mean,
capitalism in America.